What it is, what it was, and what it shall be. We're back again. Today's video is called Spirit War Bootcamp number 92, and this video is entitled Horns of the Dialectic. So, how's everyone doing? I'm doing so great, right? What's the horns of the dialectic? Well, first of all, before we get into it, I want to give a lot of thanks out to Tex Magi Dude and his very supportive community who's helped me out with a lot of material and moral support. And Tex Magi, everyone should go follow that dude's page on YouTube. He's great. He brings a lot of high level obscure information, not the same run of the mill shit that most of these conspirators are putting out there. Not to disparage anyone, okay? We're all at our own pace, but for me, having studied these topics for decades, like I like to see people bring something really new to the table. Not only that in terms of the subject matter, but to delve deeper and to have a deeper analysis. And for me, a lot of things about connecting dots. So the bigger the size of your data set, the more dots you can connect, and the less likely you are to have just a surface level interpretation of things. And this is highly pertinent to today's topic, talking about the horns of the dialectic. So talking about Tex Magi Dude and his awesome community, he recently has been covering the Mithraic cult quite a bit. And this is not just new. He's been doing this for a long time. But I was watching one of his recent videos and I got a lot of inspiration. And in particular, this video was talking about the bull sacrifice of the cult of Mithras. And so this is an obscure topic that not many people study, despite the fact that it's central to everything. All the other conspiracies go straight back to this Mithraic cult and the precursors even to that, going back to ancient Babylon, ancient Egypt, and prior. And what I'm going to show in this video today, hopefully, is that the deep semantic connections of all the three Babylonian cults that we're dealing with, how they all stem from this Mithraic root, and how even their languages, even their words and terms are all telling you and rehashing this Mithraic bull sacrifice, okay? So that's what we want to talk about today. So let's get back to the exact title, Horns of the Dialectic. So a lot of people who are studying either modern New World Order theory or who are studying the Illuminati, they know about the Hegelian dialectic, so-called, and how this is the bread and butter of the Illuminati. How do they use that? Well, think about you're trying to wrangle a bull or an ox, right? So an ox is like a castrated bull, going back to this Mithraic bull sacrifice and the castration concept. So of course, if you're a agrarian society and you got farms and you got lots of livestock, you don't want to be wrangling the bulls all the time. So you got to cut their balls off so they're more docile. And also you want to be controlling breeding. And this is, of course, and let's, with the Epstein stuff coming out, let's talk about the goyim, right? The word goyim literally means cattle, okay? And so this whole concept of cattle, castration, the whole transgender agenda, like this all super relevant. And but people do not know how deep this all goes, right? But speaking of the horns of the dialectic, right? So if you got the left wing and the right wing of the same fucking bird, you try to get people to choose a side. And as long as they're choosing a side and they're dogmatic about it, you just wrangle them just like a bull. You grab the bull by the horns, right? And you pull him this way and that, right? So left wing and right wing think they're fighting each other, right? The so-called, Christians versus the Islams, or Christians versus the Jews. It's all, it's just wrangling the bull, right? And the truth being in the middle, of course. The thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? Like the core of the bull's head, the neck, the root of the bull head, right? That's the center. And both of these are just two wings of the bird that are pulling you back and forth, left and right, using the dialectical on you, just like electricity, right? Just like the two Boaz and Yakin, the two Masonic pillars in the black and white tiles. They're telling you over and over and over, all power is generated through the dialectic. It's generated through this false opposition. But meanwhile, what are they teaching you? They're teaching you the meson, right? The middle way, the mezzanine, right? The middle particle, the mesosphere that's in the middle. That's where they always stay. And from there, they project out these two horns of the dialectic to manipulate and control society. And they go back and forth with the political pendulum between radical revolutionary trannies and then Charlie Kirk Christians, on the Christian Zionists on the other side. those both seem completely insane to me, and they're both created from a common origin. A lot of people don't want to hear that, or they may not believe that, but I'm going to get into detail talking about this at a depth most people have never contemplated. Okay, so let's start about the word El and Elohim, right? So this is the word God, and in these ancient Semitic languages, the Elohim and El comes from a word meaning to twist, right? And if you look at our modern letter L, well, it's showing you a right angle, right? So you're twisting something around to gain power and influence, right? And so if you go back to the pre-Hebrew Canaanite language, which all the modern English and Hebrew and all these different language and our modern alphabet comes from Aleph Bet and Alpha Beta in Greek, right? This is going way back to this Phoenician Canaanite language, right? And they even tell you this in the mythology about the Tower of Babel, that there was a common language somewhere in this Neo-Assyrian Babylonian Empire where the Tower of Babel was. There was a common root language that all the modern languages come from. And of course, when the tower fell, this so-called Phineas Farsaith, right, created the Gaelic language. And again, Gael coming back to the Gali and the Galilee, which is the Semitic root word meaning a circuit, to keep things going in a circuit, the circuitry. And it also means how they, circumcise the foreskin. That's another one of these little Gilgal. And they call the mountain of foreskins, where they pile up all the foreskins of their cucklord. Symbolically castrated slaves have their foreskins piled up at Gilgal, this circuit, which, and of course, Gil and Gal, both of those words mean 33 in ancient Hebrew, totaling to 33. So you can see this stuff is deep. And once you get these little skeleton keys to the code script, you're going to understand how all these seemingly disparate, seemingly fighting horns of the bull, they all come from a common root, and they're all steered from a common angle, right? And if you look out there at all the millions of conspiratard videos about the Illuminati, how many of them have actually read the written works of Adam Weishaupt, which are out there? You can go find them and read about them. How many of them have read anything by the Jesuits where they're, giving the instructions to their Jesuit operatives? Like, if you read it, they're spilling the whole beans, but they're counting on the fact that these illiterate goyim are never going to read their books and never going to get the code. Like, they don't even try to hide it super hard, right? They don't really hide it much at all. But again, these Illuminati, what do they use to plan all their coordinated events and plan all their ritualistic events? They use the Iranian calendar, okay? That's what that's what Adam Weishaupt himself is telling you in black and white. He's like, our whole system is based on the Iranian calendar, okay? It's based on the sacrifice of Tammuz and all that kind of stuff, right? And that's why they call the old New Year is now called April Fool's Day, right? Because they want to pretend that it's the fools who still celebrate that. Meanwhile, the Illuminati are the ones that are using this Iranian calendar, right? And so that's just one indicator. But let's break down this word El and Elohim. And so if you look every letter in Hebrew, so the word El is Aleph Lamed, right? So let's look at that word. You have two codes within that. Aleph is the ox, and it's not a bull, okay? It's not a bull, it's an ox. What's an ox? It's a castrated bull, okay? Very important. So the castration is there from the very inception of our English alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet, even the signs of the zodiac, right? Like in the Kabbalah, Aleph is represented by the ox, and it represents the sign of Taurus, and it represents the Fool card of the first card of the major arcana in the tarot. So like I'm saying, all these different systems are relying on one single code that unites them all. So rather than being caught in the dialectic and fighting these two horns of the bull and trying to wrangle it left versus right, up versus down, Christians versus Satanists, whatever you want to say, they're all coming from the same system. And anytime you're choosing one of those alternatives, you're trapped in the system, right? Whereas the Masons, right, the middle way people, they're telling you the opposite. They teach their initiates to go up the middle pillar, to not get caught in this dialectic between plus and minus, right? They teach them that way. And that's one of the reasons why their symbol is the hermaphrodite, or the castrated ox and the castrated bull. So this word El, like I said, it comes from a word meaning to twist something. So like to use, and it means literally power, right? So Elohim, what we translate as gods, it means powers in the plural. And this is the sense of like an instrumentality of the divine will. So often these angels and these these principalities that are described in these different books, they don't have free will, unlike human beings. Human beings have the potential for free will, but most of them have it castrated out of them. But anyway, so these angels and principalities, right, they come from this Aleph Lamed. So they have the ox and the ox goad, those two letters. And of course, this totals to 31 in the Kabbalah. And that's why a lot of our months have 31 days. Now, if you flip those around and put the Lamed Aleph, that means low or no, right? And so all the 10 commandments generally tends to start with low, which means don't do something. It's a negative commandment. It's telling you what not to do. So on the one hand, you have God. And then if you flip God around, then you have this idea of prohibition, right? So if you're trying to put a yoke around an ox, right, then this is going to control the motion of the ox and tell it where to go and where not to go. So you have al and lo. You have being yoked to the divine force, and you have the prohibition on the other side. So it's mirror flip inverse of each other. And you notice people like Crowley, who people think is this, anti-Christian satanic person, he's using this exact blueprint to run all of his stuff. Right? Where does the word Satan come from? It comes from the Bible, right? There's no Satanism without the Bible. And in fact, if you were to say, what is the scripture of the Satanists? It's the Bible. They just take everything in there and flip it. They have no definition, and they have no self-identity without that. And that's what I'm trying to illustrate and point out, is what people think are these fighting factions. They have the same origin point, and they have the same source, okay? And there's a million ways of demonstrating that. Now, one of them is really, I think a lot of people will find it shocking, is like in the modern day, we have this big battle in American politics between the trannies and the child groomers versus the Christians. But the truth of the matter is, the Christians were the first castrators. They were the first ones to do gender affirming care. Jesus himself in the New Testament is saying, yeah, you should become a eunuch for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, or more precisely, the kingdom of Uranus, right? So Uranus was this god that was he's living up in the heavens, right, in the Uranian sphere of heavens. So he's asexual, or he's more precisely pansexual, right? And so because he was such an oppressive god, and he was impregnating everything, just like Gilgamesh, he had unbridled pansexuality, right? Impregnating males, females, impregnating rocks, impregnating what we would consider inanimate or animal objects. Like, he was just pansexual, fertilizing everything. And so Saturn, or / Pan, had to come along and castrate Uranus, right? So now, whereas people think, oh, the Christians are protecting the kids from the gender transitions, well, Jesus was actually encouraging the so-called gender-affirming care for people to cut their balls and dicks off to become a eunuch for the kingdom of God, right? That's something people don't realize. And furthermore, if you look, who's the first one to show up at the tomb of Jesus, right? Who's the last one to see him and anoint him before he gets crucified, right? Miriam Magdal. So what is Magdal? Well, that comes from an Egyptian word meaning the tower. So what's the tower? Well, that's the Tower of Babel, or the Babylonian ziggurat, where the high priestess of Baal Astarte would have her sex cult. And so, no different. She's giving Jesus the amphora of unguents and anointing his head and feet, which is a death ritual, okay? And she's the first one to come to the grave after he dies. So she's just like traditional female, what the Mithraeus and these people would call Oz, A-Z or O-Z, and that's why, of course, which is a word for lust and desire, right? And that's why you have Aleister Crowley writing Liber Oz, totaling 77. And, that was one of his personal symbolic numbers. And so Oz being the force of sexual lust, right? Which you want to yoke, you want to use it and control it, just like this ox and this bull. You want to control the fertility and to control the sexuality as a manipulation tool to control the population, right? So there's not really a battle between the whore of Babylon and Jesus. He's her disciple. And nobody wants to hear that, I understand. But I could demonstrate this to you 1 million ways and more, that this is the case, right? And it's this false dialectic and this false polarization that keeps everyone controlled and keeps everyone from finding the truth. What is going to guide you to the truth? That's to study your enemy, right? Well, I grew up Christian, and my grandpa, my uncles, like almost all the males in my family were in U.S. military, and they were in the ministry, right? So I was raised amongst that. And I could tell you from personal experience, 99% of all the Christians that I met were the worst in terms of intellect, because they were taught that basically knowledge is bad. You don't want to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge. You want to be kind of dumb and naive, and you don't ever want to study anything and look into anything and find out where the Bible actually comes from. None of them that I ever knew as a child, even the ministers, never spoke Greek. They never spoke Hebrew. They never knew any of the other cultures around the Middle East from which everything in the Bible derives. It's a rehash, and it's a copy, and it's a photo negative of all these surrounding religions, everything from the Greek and the Bacchanals to the Iranians and to the Egyptians, and every single thing in there is just a repeat and a rehash. But what you can do if you're a true scholar and you want to understand the real thing is you go to the source code. You find out, what do all these religions have in common? And your mind will be blown if you realize how they are all completely identical. But like some of them say, the hero of one religion becomes the religion of the other. And they change, Mordecai to Marduk, or they change, on and on, Esther to Ishtar. And so how is it, if you take the conventional viewpoint, how is it that the evil, wicked child sacrifice, why would you name yourself as a sacred Hebrew of the sacred chosen people? Why would you name yourself after the goddess, the evil witch goddess of your enemy? Like, that doesn't make any sense unless you realize that they're all one, and all the different mishmash is just it's a bait and switch. Okay. And I'm sure people don't want to hear that, but I'm saying, just test what I'm saying. Go look it up and find out for yourself. So anyway, my point is to say, the Christian religion is the religion of gender transitions, right? It's the religion of eunuchs. You hear it out of Christ's own mouth. And if you're going to deny the words of your own Messiah, like what is the point of your religion? If you're going to, on the one hand, say that it's the infallible word of God, but then when God's only son tells you to go castrate yourself and cut your balls off to become a eunuch for the kingdom of Uranus, and you just selectively like edit that out, that's complete cognitive. That's exactly where they want you. They want you in cognitive dissonance, to be in a total state of internal contradiction. And I have faith that people can get beyond that. I have faith that they can go beyond that, right? And so when you look at these world manipulators that everyone wants to look at as the bad guys, the Illuminati, right? What's their symbol? It's the eye in the pyramid, right? Or the eye in the triangle. What's the triangle? Well, that's Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, right? And while the practitioners of this so-called Illuminism, right, they know that there's a common eye, right? There's a common source point. There's a common origin of all three of these religions, right? And just like ayin in Hebrew is 70, and Oz is 70 plus 7, right? The force of lust and the force of desire that comes out of your one-eyed Willie, right? Right? This is Oz. This is Liber Oz. And that's where they keep you trapped. Either you're trapped on the one side as a self-denying person who gives up all your property and becomes a monk and a monastic, so you're a celibate on the one side, or you're a complete pansexual deviant on the other side. They still got you. They're still trapping you through the force of Oz and through the force of sexuality and the force of the eye in the triangle. And they keep you in this dialectic, right? They keep you in the horns of the bull. Whenever George Bush would go and make that sign, people would, oh, why are you making the devil horns? And he'd be like, oh no, that's Texas Longhorns. He's not lying. He's telling you the truth. It's the ox and it's the bull. It's the castration cult of the ancient Mithraists, right? And so when you get into this dialectic, right, you're going to always think like, oh, these people over here are good. These people over here are bad, right? So like Charlie Kirk, good. Oh, he's a Christian who just happens to be married to a Mossad multi-generational defense contractor operative who participates in his human sacrifice ritual, right? So you're clearly missing the plot, and you're going to go buy, as soon as Charlie gets killed, you're going to go buy hats and freedom t-shirts from his widow, who was this, Baal sacrifice cult Mossad operative, who, just like Miriam Migdal, is there before and after Jesus's death and crucifixion. She's there on the scene. She's the closest one in proximity to the thing, but you're going to give her your money after the fact. This is how it works. And same thing with the Epstein files, right? Like now you're seeing all these so-called Epstein victims come forward and be like, oh, release the files, like putting pressure on all these people in the Trump administration. Meanwhile, come to find out that many of these so-called victims were actually become groomers and fucking, traffickers on behalf of Epstein, because he taught them the whole, and not to say that I find them to be, you know, beyond redemption and stuff like that. Obviously, they were mind controlled and manipulated and programmed from birth to do what they did. It's not like they would have done that, but they were shaped and molded into what they are, And I saw that from the very beginning when I start to listen to Virginia Giuffre and Annie Farmer and Maria Farmer. I was like, these chicks are programmed multiples. Like, they're operatives. They're not out there trying to get Epstein. They're out there to obfuscate and create a false narrative and keep you trapped by this bull, trapped by the horns of the dialectic, right? And I'm not telling anyone what to think about anything, but I'm saying you always have to have this understanding that the enemy, so-called, the herders of society, the castrators, right? The oxes and all their oxen and all their castrated operatives that are working for them and wearing the papal mitre or wearing the robes of the castrati Templar operatives, right? Like, you can't take them at face value. You got to understand that you're through the looking glass, right? You're beyond black and white. These people can pose on both sides of the spectrum. And that's what I'm saying. And as long as you're trapped in the dialectic, you're never going to get through it, and you're never going to see how they operate and how their code systems are running on you all the time. And so that's why I always say, know your enemy, right? You study the people. You don't shun away and hide from the truth of these black magic rituals and these other faiths and religions. You read them, you study them. You got to understand their modus operandi. And you got to be understanding that whatever you're looking at as the good team, right? They're infiltrated at every level. And there's all the enemy. Where would they pose themselves for maximum power and influence to herd the goy? Well, they would pose themselves as a Christian miniature, or the wife of Charlie Kirk, or Charlie Kirk himself, right? Like, where was that dude before he became head of TPUSA? There's literally no records, no pictures of him as a youth, and you have his best friend Candace Owens coming out and telling you, he was in the mind control cult. He was in the GATE program. He was surveilled and tracked by his mind control handlers. And yet people are still looking at this dude as an unimpeachable good guy, right? and being like, oh yeah, he just had no idea that his wife was child trafficking in Romania for the Mossad. Like, and that both of her parents are implicated. Like, he had no idea. He didn't do any kind of due diligence into her, like, just a few months before they hooked up and who she was involved with. Like, this is the level of cognitive dissonance that people are really in. And I'm here to express faith that people can break out of that. You can use the tools that are given to you by your own enemies. Like if you want to get biblical, they say, no tool, no weapons forged against me shall prosper. Well, how do you make that the case? How do you beat the swords into plowshares? You take the knowledge, you take the methods of your enemy, and you use them to see the future and decipher where they're going, and to look at and spot and point out all their operatives and what their game is and how they operate. You study the Illuminati, you study Adam Weishaupt, the crypto-Jewish Jesuit, So again, right there, just take that one example. Adam Weishaupt, he's a Jesuit priest of canon law, but he's in the Christian church and the Christian order of the Illuminati, the Alumbrados, right? He's in the Jesuit order praying to Jesus, right? That's what people think. But right away, you're going to see that's the horns. That's how you stay deceived, is you stay within that paradigm of black versus white. Masons bad, Christians good. Catholics good, Masons bad, right? Jews bad, Christians good. Islamic bad, Christians good. Like, they all come from the same source, okay? They're all using the same book. They're all worshiping the same Hebrew patriarchs, right? Who, again, is just another front for this Babylonian Mithraic cult that was around hundreds of years prior. And they use the same symbolism. They use the same names. They use the same letters and words and languages. They use the same myths. Like, this is the level people need to get to understand how things are going. And this is why you're going to see the Dems, the donkeys, and the elephants. You're going to see the Dems and the Republicans on Epstein Island. You're going to see You know, the finance, AI, atheist, satanic tech bros going to the island. You're going to see the so-called Christian conservatives and the Christian, you know, Joe Biden, Mr. Catholic, Catholic Jesuit, and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton going to Jesuit university. But you think these are the enemy, but they're going, you know, Trump went to Fordham, Trump went to Penn State. You know what I mean? He went to these Jesuit schools too. There's no divide. There's no aisle. There's no left and right side of the aisle on Epstein Island, right? It's the same aisle, right? And that's what people really need to understand. And I'm not doing this to point the finger and guilt anybody or make it to shame anybody. I'm saying we've all been trapped in the system. You know, like I said, I was raised by these people. I was raised by these fundamentalists, and I broke out of it. And so can you, and so can anyone. And I don't look down and look back on people that are still stuck in that. I'm trying to help them. I'm trying to show them using their own symbol code what the real game is and how to pick your head up and climb up out of the horse blinders and the ox goad that's keeping you herded through the maze. And I'm trying to show you the minotaur that's behind it all. And that's why I want to give thanks to people like Tex Magi. And most of the people that I know that I admire the most and that are so knowledgeable in these areas, it's because they went through the darkness. They got put through the ringer, you know, like me. One time I also had to go to county jail. And when I was in there, I was, you know, these dudes that were in there were telling me, oh, yeah, I'm a Mason. And I was like, wait a minute, what? And I was like, wait, you're the Mason, you're in the hierarchy, but you're still in county jail. Like, what's going on? They have operatives behind enemy lines, right? Just like the Satanists want to infiltrate the church, just like some Christians probably want to go infiltrate the satanic church to find out what they're doing. You know what I mean? This is the mindset you have to have. This is how the Jesuits operate. This is how all the intelligence networks operate. There's no such thing as black and white. There's no left and right sides of the aisle. They're doing their operations for good or bad. They're taking on a false mask. You know, they're taking on a false pretense, right? The jester having the happy face and the sad face, right? This is how you have to understand it. This is how you have to rise above the dialectic and to gain greater discernment and to be free, to be able to opt out of left and right and to be in the zero, neutral sum game, right? You're opted out of it. You're not pulled in either direction by the horns of the ox, right? You can get a much greater degree of discernment. And I hope everyone sees this in a helpful way. I don't want anyone to feel like I'm pointing the finger. I'm trying to help everybody on every side of the equation. And so I hope this has been accomplished. And I'm grateful to all my supporters. And I hope we can all continue our educational process. This has been Spirit War number 92, just like Element Uranus, right? Element Uranium. We're going beyond. We're rising above the earthly plane and the divisions, and we're getting into the higher sphere beyond duality. Thanks for listening. See you next time.